The massive crystalline chamber of the Veltharian Empire buzzed with the low hum of alien technology. Commander Vexus stood at the center, his forearms crossed as he watched the holographic displays showing intercepted signals from a distant world. The images flickered between scenes of humans running, jumping, and competing in various activities. "Look at this pathetic display," Vexus growled, his voice echoing through the chamber. The other council members leaned forward, their various alien forms casting strange shadows on the crystal walls. These creatures actually gather in large groups to watch each other run in circles. They call it sports. The display showed a human athlete crossing a finish line, tears streaming down his face as he celebrated. Another screen showed a different human, also crying, but this time in defeat. Vexus pointed at the images with disgust. "See how they weep, both in victory and defeat. What kind of warrior species cries during competition? They fight each other not for territory or resources, but for entertainment. Even have rules about how to fight fairly." The commanders. Laughter was harsh and grating. Fair fighting. What weakness? The assembled delegates murmured their agreement. The Veltharian Empire had ruled the galaxy for over 1,000 years, and their methods had never failed. They had perfected the art of conquest through their three-trial system. It was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its effectiveness. "Remind you, Miavar success rate," Vexus commanded. 847 worlds conquered," replied his aide. 847 species tested. 0 have passed all 3 trials. "The system is perfect, Commander. Trials had been designed by the greatest Veltharian strategists centuries ago. The first trial tested physical prowess, the second tested technological advancement, and the third tested mental strength. Each trial was designed to exploit the weaknesses that all species seem to share: fear, desperation, and the overwhelming instinct to simply survive rather than excel. These humans show no signs of advanced technology," Vexus continued, studying the data. "Their fastest ships barely reach their own moon. Their weapons are primitive chemical explosives. Their communication systems are laughably simple." He paused at an image showing humans helping injured competitors during a marathon. "And look at this weakness. They actually stop to help their competitors." In the middle of a race, the council chamber filled with the alien equivalent of laughter. Several delegates shook their heads in disbelief. How could any species survive with such obvious flaws? "Perhaps we should simply bypass the trials," suggested one delegate. "Why waste time with such an obviously inferior species?" "No," Vexus replied firmly. "The trials serve a purpose beyond conquest. They send a message to the galaxy about Veltharian superiority. Every species must face the trials. It maintains order." What Commander Vexus and his council didn't realize was that their intercepted broadcasts were showing only a tiny fraction of human nature. They saw the tears, but they didn't understand that humans cried from joy as often as from sadness. They saw the competition, but they missed the countless hours of preparation, the refusal to give up, and the way humans pushed themselves beyond their limits. They certainly didn't see the meeting taking place in a small office building in Seoul, where diplomat Ji-ho Kim was reading through the alien challenge with the focus of someone who had spent years studying game theory and strategic competition. Ji-ho had been an Olympic strategist before joining the diplomatic corps, and he recognized something the aliens had missed completely. "This isn't a test of survival," Ji-ho muttered to himself, highlighting sections of the alien document. "A game. They've turned conquest into a sport." He smiled, thinking of all the human athletes he'd worked with over the years. They have no idea what they've just done. The UN Assembly Hall was packed when Ji-ho presented his recommendation. Alien Challenge had arrived just hours before, demanding Earth's surrender or acceptance of their trial system. Most of the delegates were terrified, but Ji-ho's presentation changed everything. "Accept immediately," he announced confidently. "And tell them we're looking forward to it." The sleek Veltharian ships approached Earth's orbital station with the confidence of predators closing in on wounded prey. Commander Vexus had made this journey 847 times before, and each time followed the same predictable pattern. The conquered species would send their most desperate leaders, usually elderly and trembling, to beg for mercy that would never come. As the airlock hissed open, Vexus straightened his ceremonial armor and prepared for the familiar scene of cowering primitives. Instead, he stepped into what looked like a press conference from one of those human sports broadcasts they had intercepted. Bright lights illuminated a professional setup, complete with cameras, microphones, and a backdrop displaying both Earth's flag and the United Nations symbol. Human reporters filled the seating area, their voices creating a buzz of excitement rather than the silent terror Vexus expected. At the center of it all stood Ambassador Minji Park, dressed in a sharp business suit and wearing the kind of confident smile that Vexus had only seen on victorious generals. She stepped forward with her hand extended in the human greeting gesture. Commander Vexus, welcome to Earth's orbital station. Thank you so much for this incredible opportunity. Her voice carried genuine enthusiasm that made the alien commander take an involuntary step backward. We've been studying your challenge format extensively, and we have to say, it's quite fascinating from a competitive standpoint. The other Veltharian delegates looked at each other in confusion. This wasn't fear. This wasn't desperation. This was excitement. Scientist Tae Young Lee approached with a tablet computer, his eyes bright with curiosity. We've analyzed the data from your previous 847 challenges, and we noticed something interesting. Every single species approached your trials defensively, trying to minimize losses and survive through endurance. He pulled up holographic displays showing statistical breakdowns that made even the Veltharian technicians lean forward with interest. But we're curious to see how a more proactive approach might work. What happens when someone doesn't just try to survive your trials, but actually tries to excel at them? Commander Vexus felt his confidence wavering. In all his centuries of conquest, no species had ever analyzed their methods. Most were too busy panicking to think strategically. You are aware, he said, his voice carrying a slight tremor, that these are not games. These are trials of survival. Failure means the complete annihilation of your species. The humans exchanged glances, and several of them actually chuckled. Not the nervous laughter of the terrified, but the genuine amusement of people who had heard something they found genuinely funny. Commander Mingi replied, her smile never wavering. With all due respect, you've just described every major sporting event in human history. High stakes, intense competition, and the possibility of devastating loss. The only difference is that this time, the stakes are a bit higher than usual. Tae-young nodded enthusiastically. We've had athletes train their entire lives for competitions that last minutes. We've had teams spend decades preparing for tournaments that could end their careers. The concept of high-stakes competition isn't foreign to us at all. Another human stepped forward, Dr. Xian Wukong, a sports psychologist who had worked with Olympic teams. What's really interesting is that your trial system seems designed to trigger fear responses that actually impair performance. What? If participants approached it with the mindset of athletes rather than victims? The Veltharian delegates were now openly staring. Where was the begging? Where were the desperate attempts to negotiate? Where was the inevitable breakdown that always preceded surrender? You seem to be misunderstanding something, Vexus said, his voice growing louder. This is not a sporting event. This is a matter of survival. Your entire species hangs in the balance. The humans looked at each other again, and this time their expressions grew more serious. For a moment, Vexus thought he had finally gotten through to them. Then Mingi spoke again, her voice calm and steady. Commander, we understand perfectly. Our entire species is at stake, which makes this the most important competition in human history. We've been preparing for something like this our whole lives without even knowing it. She gestured to the crowd of reporters and officials behind her. Every human here has either competed in high-stakes situations or supported those who have. We know what it means to perform under pressure. We know what it takes to succeed when failure isn't an option. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in his long career, Commander Vexus found himself at a loss for words. So Minji continued cheerfully, When do we start? The massive arena carved from volcanic rock had witnessed the destruction of champions from 847 different worlds. Ancient bloodstains marked the fighting ground, where countless species had sent their strongest warriors to face inevitable defeat. The circular pit stretched 50 meters across, surrounded by towering walls filled with alien spectators who had come to witness another routine execution. Commander Vexus stood in the royal viewing box, his confidence restored after the unsettling meeting with the humans. Physical combat was where reality would finally sink in for these strange creatures. No amount of enthusiasm could overcome the brutal mathematics of size, strength, and natural weaponry. "Behold Korath, the Destroyer," Vexus announced, his voice echoing through the arena's amplification system. It's undefeated in 300 battles, winner of the Galactic Combat Championships for 7 consecutive years. The massive gate groaned open, and Korath emerged into the arena. The creature stood nearly 9 feet tall, his 4 muscular arms ending in claws that could tear through steel. His chitinous armor gleamed under the arena lights, battle-scarred, but impenetrable. Each step he took left deep impressions in the packed earth floor. The crowd of alien spectators cheered, a sound like grinding metal mixed with static. They had seen this performance before. The human champion would take one look at Korath and either flee in terror or charge desperately to a quick death. Then the opposite gate opened, and Hunwoo Song walked out. The arena fell silent. The human stood barely 6 feet tall, wearing simple combat gear that looked like sporting equipment compared to Korath's natural armor. He carried no weapons, bore no visible enhancements, and showed no signs of genetic modification. He looked exactly like what he was, a regular human being. But what struck the alien audience most was his expression, instead of the terror or grim determination they expected. Hunwoo wore a genuine smile. He was actually looking forward to this. This should be interesting. He called out to Korath in a friendly tone, "I've never fought anyone with 4 arms before. Do you coordinate them? Or does each arm think independently?" Korath tilted his massive head, confused. In 300 battles, no opponent had ever started with casual conversation. The starting horn blared. Korath did what had worked 300 times before. He charged straight forward with overwhelming force, all 4 arms extended to grab, crush, and tear his opponent apart. The attack was brutal, direct, and had never failed. Hunwoo didn't try to match the alien's strength or speed. Instead, he did something that made the crowd gasp. He waited until the last possible second, then dropped to one knee and slid sideways like a baseball player stealing second base. As Korath thundered past, Hunwoo scooped up a handful of arena sand and flung it directly into the alien's eyes. The destroyer's roar of pain and confusion shook the arena walls as he stumbled forward, temporarily blinded. But Hunwoo wasn't finished. As Korath staggered, trying to clear his vision, the human grabbed the alien's rear leg and used Korath's own momentum against him. The massive creature crashed face first into the arena wall with a thunderous impact that sent cracks spiderwebbing through the ancient stone. The arena erupted in shocked silence. In 3 seconds, their undefeated champion lay groaning on the ground, his armor cracked, his pride shattered, and his 4 arms tangled beneath him. What happened next had never occurred in the arena's 1,000-year history. Hunwoo walked over to the fallen giant and extended his hand. "Hey, you all right? That was a pretty hard hit. Here, let me help you up." Korath stared at the offered hand through his clearing vision, completely bewildered. The human who had just defeated him was now trying to help him stand? "I probably should have mentioned this earlier," Hunwoo said, with an apologetic grin, as he helped the massive alien to his feet. "Humans don't really believe in fair fighting when survival is at stake. We use whatever advantages we can find. But that was a good charge. If you'd connected, this fight would have been over in seconds." The alien champion found himself being steadied by his opponent, who was now offering tactical advice about the fight they'd just finished. "Your footwork is impressive for someone with 4 arms," Hunwoo continued conversationally. "The coordination must take years to master. I bet you're incredible in a straight-up strength contest." Commander Vexus stared down at the scene in complete disbelief. His undefeated champion was now nodding thoughtfully at combat tips from the human who had just embarrassed him in front of the entire galaxy. The crowd remained silent, unsure how to react to something that had never happened before. Victory was familiar. Defeat was expected. But this combination of tactical brilliance and genuine sportsmanship was completely outside their experience. "Good fight," Hyunwoo said, offering Korath a respectful bow. "Thanks for the match." For the first time in arena history, the defeated champion bowed back. The technology trial chamber was a masterpiece of Veltharian engineering, a sterile environment filled with holographic displays and precision instruments that hummed with advanced alien technology. The test itself was considered impossible by galactic standards. Restore power to a completely dead space station using only the materials available in the chamber for 8 centuries. The greatest minds from 847 conquered worlds had failed this trial. The Veltharians had designed it to showcase their technological superiority while demonstrating the futility of resistance. The chamber contained the most sophisticated quantum manipulation devices, molecular assemblers, and energy conversion systems in the galaxy. Commander Vexus watched from the observation deck as his top engineers prepared their equipment. "This trial has never taken longer than 30 minutes, he announced to the assembled observers. "Most species surrender within the first 10 minutes once they realize the impossibility of the task." The Veltharian team assembled their tools. With practiced efficiency, quantum field generators materialized from storage compartments. Molecular scanners extended from the walls on articulated arms. The air itself seemed to shimmer with the energy of advanced technology beyond human comprehension. Then, the human contestant entered the chamber. Su-Young Choi looked completely out of place in the high-tech environment. She wore simple work clothes and carried what appeared to be a battered toolbox that looked like it had been purchased at a garage sale decades ago. The alien observers exchanged glances, some actually laughing at the contrast between their sophisticated equipment and this human's primitive supplies. "What is your primary technological instrument?" asked the Veltharian chief engineer. Gesturing toward the quantum devices, Su-Yang opened her toolbox and began laying out her tools on a nearby table. "Well, let's see. I've got duct tape, zip, ties, a multi-tool, some electrical wire, and..." She held up a simple copper wire that looked like it had been salvaged from old electronics. "This little guy right here." The silence in the observation chamber was deafening. The most advanced technological civilization in the galaxy was about to compete against duct tape and zip ties. "You are aware," the chief engineer said slowly, "that this station's power core has been completely destroyed. The quantum matrix has collapsed. The fusion reactors are offline, and the entire energy distribution network is non-functional." "I saw that," Su-Yang replied cheerfully, already moving toward the station's control panels. "Pretty thorough job, actually. Whoever designed this test really wanted to make sure nothing would work normally." The timer began, and the Veltharian team immediately started their approach. They began disassembling the quantum field generators, preparing to rebuild the station's power core from scratch using molecular-level reconstruction. Their plan was elegant, sophisticated, and theoretically perfect. Su-Yang ignored the power core entirely. Instead, she crawled under the control panels and started following the ventilation system.
How the aliens worked with precision instruments.
She was pulling apart air ducts and examining the station's basic infrastructure. "Interesting," she muttered, her voice echoing from inside the ventilation shaft. "The emergency lighting system is still intact. Look at this, the gravity. The generator has its own backup power cell." The Veltharian engineers paused their work to watch as the human emerged from the ventilation system covered in dust and carrying what looked like random pieces of equipment. "The thing about complex systems," Su-Yang explained, connecting wires, "with practiced efficiency, is that they usually have redundant components scattered throughout the structure. You just have to find them and convince them to work together." She began connecting her improvised setup. Kekapor wire ran from the gravity generator to the emergency lighting system. Duct tape secured connections that would have required precision welding and Veltharian engineering. Zip ties held everything in place with the kind of makeshift reliability that made alien engineers cringe. "This is impossible," the chief engineer protested. "Those systems aren't compatible. The voltage differentials alone would cause catastrophic and failure." "You're absolutely right," Su Yang agreed. Pulling out her multi-tool and making adjustments to what looked like a circuit board salvaged from the life support system. Under normal circumstances, this would never work. Well, but these aren't normal circumstances. She made one final connection, and suddenly lights began flickering on throughout the station. Not the steady illumination of properly restored power, but the irregular glow of a system that was working despite itself. "It's not pretty," she admitted, surveying her jury-rigged creation with satisfaction. "And it probably won't last more than a few hours. But it works, and sometimes that's all you need." The alien judges stared at their sophisticated quantum equipment. Then, at the humans' improvised solution that somehow provided more power than their theoretical reconstruction had promised. "How?" the chief engineer whispered. "Sometimes the best solution is the simplest one," Su Yang replied. "You don't always need to rebuild everything from scratch. Sometimes you just need to find what's already there and help it remember how to work." The observation chamber filled with confused murmurs. 8 centuries of technological superiority had just been outperformed by duct tape and creative thinking. The psychic trial chamber was perhaps the most terrifying place in the Veltharian Empire. Unlike the physical arena or the technology lab, this room was designed to break something far more fundamental than bodies or machines. It was built to shatter minds. The chamber itself was deceptively simple, a circular room with smooth black walls that seemed to absorb all light and sound. At its center sat the mind probe device, a chair surrounded by crystalline structures that pulsed with an eerie blue glow. The crystals were connected to the most powerful psychic amplifiers in the galaxy, capable of projecting thoughts, emotions, and nightmares directly into a subject's consciousness. Commander Vexus stood behind reinforced glass in the observation area, flanked by the Empire's most skilled psychic interrogators. These beings had broken the minds of the strongest warriors, the wisest philosophers, and the most determined leaders from nearly 900 conquered worlds. They were experts in finding the deepest fears hidden in any sentient mind and turning those fears into weapons. "This trial has never lasted longer than 7 minutes, announced Master Psychic Zareth, her voice carrying the cold confidence of someone who had never failed. "Most subjects experience complete psychological breakdown within the first 3 minutes. The longest holdout was a warrior from the Centauri system who lasted 6 minutes and 43 seconds before begging for death. The previous trials had shaken the Veltharian confidence, but this was where they would reclaim their superiority. Physical combat could be won through luck or strategy. Technology could be overcome through creative thinking. But the mind was different. The psychic trial reached into the deepest parts of consciousness, finding the primal fears that existed in every living being. Dr. Jin Wuhan entered the chamber with the same calm demeanor. He brought to his therapy sessions back on Earth as a psychiatrist who had spent 15 years helping patients overcome trauma. He had seen the darkest corners of human psychology. He had guided people through their worst fears, helped them process their deepest pain, and watched them emerge stronger on the other side. "Are you ready to begin?" asked Master Psychic Zareth, as the restraints secured Dr. Han to the chair. "Curious to see what you have to show me," Jinwu replied with genuine interest. "I've always been fascinated by how different species process fear and trauma." The psychics exchanged glances. This wasn't the usual response they received from terrified subjects. The crystals began to glow brighter, and the psychic assault commenced. Waves of terror flooded Jinwu's mind, images of death, destruction, and despair carefully crafted to trigger every possible fear response. The psychics projected visions of Earth burning, of humanity being wiped from existence, of loved ones dying in agony. The observation room fell silent as they waited for the inevitable screaming to begin. Instead, Dinwu's voice came through the speakers, calm and analytical. "Interesting technique. Are you projecting your own subconscious fears? Or are these manufactured scenarios? Because I'm sensing some unresolved trauma in the imagery." Master Psychic Zareth's confidence wavered. Increase the intensity, she commanded. The psychic assault doubled in strength. Visions of hopelessness and defeat crashed against Jinwoo's consciousness like waves against a shore, but instead of breaking, he seemed to be studying the attack itself. There's definitely some abandonment issues here, he continued, his voice maintaining its professional tone. The recurring theme of isolation and rejection suggests deep-seated insecurity. Have you considered that your need to dominate other species might stem from feelings of inadequacy about your own worth? One of the junior psychics actually recoiled from the connection, looking disturbed. The roles were reversing instead. Of the human beings psychologically analyzed, he was analyzing them. The imagery you're using is quite revealing, Jinwoo continued. The emphasis on conquest and submission, the need to see others suffer, these are classic patterns I see in patients who experience childhood trauma. Were you abandoned by your parents? Did your species go through some kind of collective trauma that created this need to prove superiority? Master Psychic Zareth increased the power to dangerous levels. The crystals around the chair began to crack from the strain. But instead of breaking the human's mind, the psychic feedback was beginning. To affect her own thoughts, I'm just saying, Jinwoo's voice remained perfectly calm. Conquering 847 worlds suggests you're trying to fill some kind of emotional void. When did you last feel truly valued for who you are, rather than what you could destroy? Because healthy, confident beings don't usually need to prove themselves by hurting others. The feedback through the psychic connection was becoming overwhelming. The human's mind wasn't just resisting their attack, it was responding with empathy, understanding, and genuine concern for their psychological well-being. It was like trying to attack someone with a sword, only to have them respond by offering you a hug. The need for control often stems from feeling powerless, Jinwoo continued. And the compulsion to inflict suffering usually comes from unprocessed pain. Have you ever considered therapy? Because I think there's a lot of healing that needs to happen here. Master Psychic Zareth's hands were shaking as she reached for the disconnect switch. The psychic assault was supposed to break the human's mind, but instead it was forcing her to confront her own deep-seated issues. The human's compassionate response was more unsettling than any resistance they had ever encountered. This trial is ... concluded, she announced, her voice barely above a whisper. The crystals powered down, and Dr. Jinwoo Han sat up in the chair, looking slightly concerned. Are you okay? He asked, noticing the distressed state of the psychics. That was quite intense for me, but I imagine it was much harder on you. Projecting that much negative energy must be exhausting. For the first time in the history of the psychic trials, the interrogators needed therapy more than their subject. The council's private chambers had never witnessed such confusion. A vast circular room carved from a single piece of crystalline mineral normally echoed with the confident discussions of a conquering empire. Tonight, it buzzed with whispered conversations and nervous energy that hadn't been felt in centuries. Representatives from dozens of species filled the tiered seating, their various forms creating a tapestry of alien life that spanned the galaxy. But for the first time in their collective memory, they weren't discussing another successful conquest. They were trying to understand something that challenged everything they thought they knew about the nature of domination and survival. Delegate Thresh of the Mantic Collective, whose species had been conquered 300 years ago, leaned forward in his seat. His insect-like features twitched with barely contained excitement. I've been reviewing the recordings from all 3 trials, he said, his voice carrying a buzz that others had to strain to understand. The humans don't just survive our trials, they actually seem to enjoy them. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Other delegates pulled up their own recordings, studying the human faces during each trial, where they expected to see the familiar expressions of terror, desperation, and resignation. They found something entirely different. Look at this, said Representative Korth from the Zindari mining worlds, projecting a holographic replay of the combat trial. When their fighter helped our champion to his feet, he wasn't showing mercy to a defeated enemy. He was genuinely concerned about another competitor's well-being. Image froze on Hyeonwoo's face as he helped Koreth stand. There was no trace of the cold calculation that conquering species typically showed. Instead, there was something the aliens had rarely seen: genuine sportsmanship. The technology trial was even more unusual, added Counselor Vex from the Outer Rim territories. Instead of trying to match our advanced equipment, their engineer treated it like a puzzle to be solved. She was actually having fun while jury-rigging that power system. The holographic display shifted to show Suyang's face as she worked. Her expression wasn't the grim determination of someone fighting for survival. It was the focused joy of someone doing what they loved under pressure. "But the psychic trial," whispered Representative ELC from the Sigma Quadrant. "That was something I've never seen in 8 centuries of observation. Your psychiatrist didn't just resist our mental assault, he turned it into a therapy session."
Commander?
Vexus had been pacing the central platform throughout these discussions, his forearms gesticulating in frustration. "They're making a mockery of our sacred trials," he roared, his voice echoing off the crystalline walls. "These trials have maintained galactic order for 1,000 years. They represent the natural hierarchy of species." But Elder Zinth, the oldest member of the council, raised one of his ancient limbs for silence. His species had been among the first to join the Veltharian Empire, and his wisdom was respected even by those who feared him. "No, Commander," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "They're not mocking our trials. They're treating them like games. It's like challenges to be solved rather than tests to be endured." The chamber fell silent as the implications of this observation settled over the assembled delegates. Games, challenges, competition for the sake of improvement. Rather than domination, think about those broadcasts we intercepted, Elder Zinth continued. "We saw humans competing in what they call sports and dismissed them as weak because they cried when they lost. But we misunderstood what we were seeing. They weren't crying from weakness, they were crying because they cared so much about the competition itself." Delegate Thresh's buzzing grew more excited. Their entire species approaches challenges differently than we do. When we conquer a world, we see it as establishing dominance. When they face a challenge, they see it as an opportunity to grow. "The combat trial became a teaching moment," observed Representative Korth. "Their fighter wasn't trying to humiliate our champion. He was sharing knowledge about different fighting techniques." The technology trial turned into an engineering seminar, added Counselor Vex. Their engineer wasn't trying to prove human superiority. She was demonstrating alternative problem-solving methods. "And the psychic trial became a therapy session," concluded Representative Ulf. "Their psychiatrist wasn't trying to resist our mental attack. He was genuinely concerned about the psychological well-being of our psychics. The pattern was becoming undeniable. Every trial had been transformed from a test of survival into something constructive, where other species had approached the trials with fear and desperation. Humans had approached them with curiosity, creativity, and an inexplicable sense of fun. This changes everything, Elder Zinth said softly. For 1,000 years, we've built our empire on the assumption that all species share the same fundamental drives: fear, aggression, and the will to survive at any cost. But these humans operate on entirely different principles. Commander Vexus stopped pacing. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Elder Zinth replied, "that we may have encountered the first species that doesn't see our trials as a threat to be survived, but as a game to be won. And if they're playing a Game while we're conducting a test of dominance. The unspoken conclusion hung in the air like a cloud of uncertainty. For the first time in their history, the Veltharian Empire faced an opponent who wasn't playing by the same rules they had used to conquer the galaxy. The emergency session was called at the darkest hour of the Veltharian night cycle, when the twin moons cast eerie shadows across the capital city. The leadership chamber, normally reserved for planning conquest celebrations, now felt more like a war room facing an unexpected crisis. Commander Vexus stood at the head of the obsidian table, his forearms spread wide as he addressed the most powerful beings in the galaxy. Around him sat the military commanders, intelligence chiefs, and senior advisors who had built and maintained the Empire's dominance for over 1,000 years. But tonight, for the first time in their collective memory, they looked uncertain. This was supposed to be a routine conquest, Vexus began, his voice tight with frustration. Planet Earth. Population. 8 billion primitives. Technology level. Barely capable of reaching their own moon. Military capability. Chemical explosives and metal projectiles. It should have been over in hours. Intelligence Officer Nex, whose species specialized in gathering information across the galaxy, activated a holographic display showing communication intercepts from dozens of worlds. Commander, we have a problem. The other species are talking. The display showed conversations from conquered worlds throughout the Empire. Species that had been silent for centuries were suddenly engaging in discussions about the human trials. The intercepted communications painted a picture that made the Veltharian leadership deeply uncomfortable. They're asking questions about the humans, Nex continued, highlighting specific transmissions. The Zentarians want to know why their champion didn't think to help his opponent up after defeating him. The Malthusian psychics are wondering if they should have tried therapy instead of mind-breaking. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. For 1,000 years, conquered species had accepted their defeat as the natural order. They had never questioned whether different approaches might have yielded different results. Some are wondering if they could have approached our trials differently, Nex added quietly. Commander Vexus's fist crashed down on the obsidian table with such force that cracks spiderwebbed. Across its surface, these humans are disrupting the natural order, he roared. They're making other species question our authority. They're giving conquered worlds ideas about resistance. General Corax, the Empire's military strategist, leaned forward with concern. The humans aren't just winning our trials, Commander. They're changing what our trials mean. Every conquered species is now asking themselves, what if we had tried that approach? The holographic display shifted to show analysis reports from the Empire's sociologists. Across 847 conquered worlds, there were signs of something that hadn't been seen in centuries. Hope. The Andromedon colonies have started organizing what they call problem-solving competitions, reported Chief Analyst Forth. The Tau Ceti miners are sharing engineering techniques they learned from watching the human technology trial. The vegan telepaths are practicing something they call therapeutic communication. Elder Zinth, who had been silent throughout the discussion, finally spoke. His ancient voice carried the weight of centuries. Perhaps we should reconsider our position. The humans have technically passed all 3 trials. According to our own laws, they have earned the right to join the Empire as equals. The chamber erupted in protest from various commanders, but Vexus's voice cut through the noise. No, he bellowed. We cannot set this precedent. If we allow one species to redefine our trials, others will follow. The Empire will crumble. Then, what do you propose? Asked Elder Zinth. Vexus began pacing, his mind racing through possibilities. We give them one final test, something no species has ever solved, something impossible even for them. What kind of test? Asked General Corax. Something that cannot be turned into a game, Vexus replied. Something that cannot be solved through creativity or collaboration. something that will break their spirit and show the galaxy that human methods have limits. But even as he spoke these words, Vexus felt a nagging doubt in the back of his mind. The humans had shown a disturbing pattern throughout their trials. They didn't just overcome challenges, they seemed to redefine what the challenges meant entirely in the combat. Trial, they had turned a fight into a teaching moment. In the technology trial, they had turned a rebuilding project into an engineering seminar. In the psychic trial, they had turned a mind-breaking session into a therapy appointment. Sir, ventured Intelligence Officer Nex, what if they find a way to solve the impossible test too? The question hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Vexus wanted to dismiss it immediately, but the evidence was mounting. These humans approached every challenge with the same inexplicable combination of creativity. They won't, Vexus said finally, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. They can't. What I have in mind will require them to choose between their principles and their survival. When we're forced to make that choice, he trailed off. But privately, he was no longer certain. The humans had already surprised them 3 times. What if they discovered a 4th option that no one had considered? For the first time in his long career, Commander Vexus was genuinely afraid. It's not of losing a battle, but of losing the very foundation upon which the Empire had been built. The final trial chamber was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Instead of physical combat arenas or testing laboratories, this was a massive holographic command center that could simulate entire star systems in real time. The walls disappeared into a 3-dimensional display of the Kepler 442 system. Spinning helplessly in its expanding radiation field, Commander Vexus stood at the center of the display, his confidence partially restored. This was the test that had broken every species that had come before. Not a test of strength, technology, or mental fortitude, but a test of impossible choices and moral compromise. Behold the Kepler 442 system, he announced to the assembled observers. 5 worlds, each home to billions of sentient beings. Their star is dying, expanding into a red giant that will consume all life within the next 72 hours. The holographic display showed the grim reality in devastating detail. The star's outer layers were already beginning to expand, sending waves of deadly radiation toward the inhabited planets. The first world was already experiencing massive evacuations as surface temperatures soared beyond survivable levels. This is not a test of combat or engineering, Vexus continued. This is a test of leadership under impossible circumstances. Every species before you has attempted evacuation. Every species has failed. There simply isn't enough time. Enough ships or enough resources to save everyone. The human team entered the chamber led by Dr. Yoon B-Yoon, an astrophysicist who had spent her career studying stellar evolution. Behind her walked a diverse group of Earth's finest minds, engineers, physicists, mathematicians, and logisticians, who had been preparing for this moment since the trials began. The previous record was set by the Altarian Federation, Vexus explained. They managed to evacuate 2.3 billion beings before their time expired. They saved roughly 15% of the total population. Most species save less than 5%. Dr. Yunbi studied the holographic star system, her team gathering around her as data streams flowed across their portable displays. The scale of the disaster was staggering. 5 worlds. You may begin, Vexus announced. The human team huddled together, their voices barely audible as they discussed options. The alien observers leaned forward, expecting to see the familiar pattern of desperate calculation that always preceded the inevitable decision about who would live and who would die. 17 minutes later, Dr. Yunbi straightened up and addressed the chamber. "We're not evacuating anyone," she announced calmly. The silence that followed was deafening. Commander Vexus stared at her in disbelief. Had the humans simply given up? Were they admitting defeat without even trying? "You're abandoning them?" he asked, his voice barely concealing his shock. "No," Yunbi replied, pulling up holographic displays that showed complex mathematical models. "We're moving the star." The laughter that erupted from the alien observers was immediate and incredulous. The idea was so absurd that several species began making sounds that could only be described as their version of hysterical giggling. Impossible. declared Chief Scientist Sarian of the Veltharian Academy. You cannot move a star. The mass alone would require energy equivalent to the output of 1,000 galaxies. Not move it, Dr. Yunbi corrected patiently. Redirect its stellar wind. Engineer Hyunsu Park has calculated that if we detonate a series of controlled fusion bombs at specific points in the star's corona, we can create a directional stellar wind that will push the star away from the inhabited worlds. The laughter stopped abruptly. The alien scientists began frantically checking their own calculations, their expressions shifting from amusement to confusion to growing alarm. The radiation from those detonations alone would kill everyone on all 5 worlds, protested a Veltharian physicist. That's why we're also deploying a magnetic field generator, added Dr. Kungman, the team's specialist in electromagnetic physics. We've modified the design from Earth's Aurora research. By creating a controlled magnetic field around each inhabited world, we can deflect the harmful radiation while allowing the stellar wind to do its work. The holographic displays now showed the human plan in detail. Instead of accepting the impossible choice between saving some lives and losing others, they had found a third option that no one had considered. Change the fundamental parameters of the problem itself. This is theoretical madness, muttered Chief Scientist Zarian, but his voice lacked conviction. The mathematics were actually holding up under scrutiny. What followed was the most audacious engineering project in galactic history. The human team didn't just propose their solution, they implemented it. Using the chamber's simulation capabilities, they demonstrated how precisely placed fusion detonations could create controllable stellar winds. They showed how magnetic field generators could protect inhabited worlds from radiation while allowing the star's own energy to push it away from the planets it threatened. The simulation ran for what felt like hours. The alien observers watched in stunned silence as the human plan unfolded. The dying star's expansion was not just stopped, it was redirected. The stellar wind created by the controlled detonations began pushing the star away from the inhabited worlds, creating a stable configuration that would last for millennia. It's working, whispered one of the observers. It's impossible, muttered another. It's working, repeated the first. The simulation showed the final result. All 5 worlds saved, their populations intact, and their star transformed from a threat into a controlled propulsion system that would keep the system stable for thousands of years. Commander Vexus stared at the holographic display, his worldview crumbling around him. The humans hadn't just solved the impossible test. They had redefined what impossible meant. How? He whispered. Dr. Yumbi smiled. Because we refused to accept that the choice was between saving some lives and losing others. We looked for a way to save everyone, and we found it. The chamber fell silent as the implications settled over everyone present. For the first time in galactic history, someone had faced the impossible test and solved it completely. The Galactic Council Chamber had never experienced silence like this. For over 1,000 years, these crystalline walls had echoed with the sounds of conquest celebrations, the formal surrenders of defeated species, and the confident proclamations of Veltharian superiority. But now, as the final confirmation reports from the Kepler 442 system streamed across the holographic displays, the chamber was filled with a silence so complete that even the ambient hum of the life support systems seemed deafening, Commander. Vexus stood frozen at the center of the chamber, his forearms hanging limply at his sides as he stared at the impossible data. The reports were clear, verified by multiple independent sources, and completely undeniable. The humans had not only solved the impossible test, they had solved it perfectly. All 5 worlds saved. 15 billion lives preserved. The dying star transformed into a controlled propulsion system that would keep the system stable for millennia. How? He whispered, his voice barely audible in the vast chamber. Ambassador Minji Park stepped forward, her expression calm and confident. Throughout the trials, she had maintained the same demeanor, not the desperate determination of someone fighting for survival, but the quiet confidence of someone who genuinely believed that every problem had a solution waiting to be discovered. Because we don't accept that anything is truly impossible, she said simply. We just haven't found the right solution yet. Every problem that seems impossible is really just a puzzle that requires a different approach. The words hung in the air like a revelation. Around the chamber, representatives from hundreds of species began to murmur among themselves. This wasn't just about the humans passing the trials. This was about a fundamentally different way of looking at the universe itself. Elder Zinth, whose ancient wisdom had guided the Empire for centuries, stepped forward slowly. His aged features showed the weight of recognition, the understanding that everything they had built was about to change forever. The Veltharian Empire, he began, his voice carrying the formal cadence of official proclamation, formally recognizes Earth as a sovereign world and extends an invitation to join the Galactic Council as an equal member. The chamber erupted in whispers and gasps. In the Empire's history, no species had ever been invited to join as equals. Every other world had been conquered, subjugated, and forced into submission. But the humans had done something unprecedented. They had earned respect rather than demanding it. "Thank you, Minji," replied graciously. "We accept your invitation with one condition." The chamber fell silent again, but this time the silence was different. It wasn't the stunned quiet of defeat, but the tense anticipation of beings who had suddenly realized they were no longer in control of the conversation. "We'd like to review your challenge system," Minji continued. "Not to eliminate it, the concept of testing species before they join the galactic community isn't necessarily wrong. But we'd like to modify it. Instead of trials of conquest, what if they became trials of cooperation? Instead of testing species for the right to exist, what if we tested their ability to contribute?" The suggestion was so radical that several delegates actually stood up in shock. The idea of cooperation instead of domination, contribution instead of submission, went against everything the Empire had been built on. "What exactly are you proposing?" asked Elder Zinth. "Imagine trials where species work together to solve problems. Instead of competing to avoid destruction," Mingi explained, "where success is measured by how well they collaborate rather than how completely they submit. Where the goal is to discover what each species can offer the galaxy rather than proving they deserve to survive." The transformation that followed was unprecedented in galactic history. Within months, the Galactic Council had evolved from a conquering empire into a collaborative federation. The trial system was completely redesigned, becoming a process of mutual evaluation and cooperative problem-solving. Species that had been subjugated for centuries suddenly found themselves invited to participate as equals. The Zentarian engineers worked alongside Veltharian scientists to solve interstellar transportation problems. The Corthex miners shared their techniques with human geologists to develop better planetary resource management.
The Malthusian psychics
Collaborated with human therapists to create new forms of interspecies communication, but the most remarkable change was in how other species viewed the challenges they faced. The human approach, treating every problem as a puzzle to be solved rather than an obstacle to be endured, began spreading throughout the galaxy. Species that had accepted limitations for centuries started questioning whether those limitations were real or simply assumptions they had never challenged. The irony was not lost on anyone, least of all Commander Vex's, who found himself in the unexpected position of seeking human advice on problems that had plagued the Empire for generations. The species they had dismissed as weakest had become the one they most desperately needed. "Still don't understand," he admitted to Ambassador Minji during one of their regular consultation meetings. "How do you maintain such optimism in the face of impossible challenges?" Mingi smiled. "Because we've learned that impossible is usually just another word for we haven't tried hard enough yet. Every human child grows up hearing stories about people who accomplished things that everyone said couldn't be done. We're raised to believe that creativity, persistence, and collaboration can overcome any obstacle. And that, the aliens learned, was why you should never challenge humans. Not because they were the strongest or the smartest, but because they were the only species in the galaxy who treated impossible challenges as invitations to get creative. They approached every problem with the unshakable belief that somewhere, somehow, there was a solution waiting to be discovered. The galaxy would never be the same.